What is up, gamers? I just got back from BCS Chicago, and it was a blast, honestly. This might have been the funnest BCS I've been to, and I saw so many really cool people while I was there. For Premium, I brought a very, very cool deck. This deck idea I came up with about 2 to 3 weeks ago, and it initially started off as a meme, but the more I played with it, the more real the deck felt. And I ended up taking it to BCS. I went X3 with it, which isn't fantastic, but 2 of those games I had full control over. I just misplayed really hard. And then one of the losses was pretty much out of my control. But there is some real potential with this deck. And this deck is Aqua Force. In my opinion, this is probably the best way to play Aqua Force currently. Ever since History Collection came out, Aqua Force has been very lackluster, mainly due to the new errata on Hanali, making the deck that needs to attack a certain number of times become a lot worse when it's restricted on how many times it can attack. It also got a pretty whatever stride errata, and it was really just a side grade compared to V Thavis and V Lambros. But the cool thing about this deck is it doesn't care about Hanali and completely changes the way Aqua Force plays. So yeah, what could possibly have done this? A lot of Aqua Force players gave up on the clan for this format because it's just been really bad. It's gotten a whole 3 tops since History Collection came out, 2 of which were from Tri-Regulation. So for background, I worked on a Vanguard cube, which I still need to do that with the creators I did that with. You still need to finish that, but it's fine. And there was a very interesting card that I put into the cube, and then I started thinking about it more in the context of Aqua Force. It was like, damn, could this work? So the card this deck is entirely built around is Battle Siren Chloris. This is a very old card. A lot of people don't know what this is, but this is one of the coolest cards in the game in my opinion. It essentially gives you way more options defensively and allows the deck to play a longer game. Now the biggest thing about this, Aqua Force historically hasn't had that many bind mechanics. The only main ones really was Amphibian Dragon, which could bind the Transcore from deck, but it just ended up being a 5k shield, so it wasn't very worth it for the deck space. The one time Chloris saw any play was right after the resource heals came out, which luckily in History Collection, these also got errataed to be normal V and D trigger power. So the resource heals, whenever you discard them to G-Guard, you can bind 2 heals from your drop zone, and then you can either counter charge or soul charge. So in tandem with Chloris, this is insanely cool, because now you can G-Guard using these heals, and then you'd be able to call down the G-Guard defensively, and then you would also bind those heals in order to use a shield later on. Now the big thing to note, Chloris states at the beginning of guard step, so after you discard for G-Guarding, you won't be able to use these heals in the same attack. But for future attacks, they become essentially 20k shields that you can use. And this becomes a lot better once you start guarding with them and you have multiple heals in hand. So let's say you have 1 heal in drop and 2 heals in hand. You G-Guard into something, you bind the 2 heals, then on the next attack, you use Chloris to guard with one of the heals, and then on the following attack, you can G-Guard again, bind that heal you just guarded with and the heal you just discarded for G-Guard. And now you have 60k shield you can utilize in your bind zone. And off of the one you guarded with to put back into drop, that was another 20k shield. So you essentially got 80k shield for just existing, which is really powerful. And 20k shield is actually really nice. You can block a lot of really annoying numbers just by using a 20k shield. So historically, this has been a package that was played in very late G era. And even with the errata to the heals, this normally wouldn't be enough in order to make this deck viable. Now, the only other time Chloris has been talked about recently was when Festival Collection 2024 was being revealed. There was a new subset of cards that were coming out in that set. A lot of clans got a set order and a grade 2 that searches for that set order. So Dragon Empire, Dark States, and Lyrical got one that gives one of your rear guards boost at the start of battle phase. And then Keter, Brantgate, and Stoicheia, which is where Aqua Force belongs, got what became known as the Hostage package. So we play the new order in that. So this set order says once per turn, whenever your unit is attacked, you can choose one of your rear guards that isn't being attacked and move it to Guardian Circle. And then at the end of the battle, instead of it being retired from Guardian Circle, it gets bound instead. So this with Chloris becomes insanely cool because now we have access to our entire deck that we can put in bind zone. Any high shield values we can use, any random pieces on the board we don't need anymore, we can use as fodder. And in tandem with Chloris, anything we choose to use off of this order, we can guard with twice because we will guard with it once, moving it to Guardian Circle, and then it gets bound, and then on the next battle, Chloris can guard with it again. So let's just say you have a vanilla trigger. You can use the order to move it to Guardian Circle. It's a 15k shield for that battle. Then you bind it. Then on the next battle, you can use Chloris to pull it back out as a 20k shield. So this package, just having an order, a Chloris, and a trigger, or some other varying shield value on the board, allows you to just block 2 attacks without using any cards in your hand. When I started researching for this deck, I was looking in Discord channels, YouTube, just random social media platforms, and I saw quite literally 0 deck lists for something like this. I've seen people talk about it when Chloris came out, but I saw no one make an effort to actually try to make this deck work. So the onus became on me to build this deck from the ground up without anything to base it off of. And that is what this entire deck is making this core idea function as best as possible. So to start, we also play 2 of the searchers for these. The searcher becomes really cool as well because it's a 10k shield whenever you choose to target it off the order. And then it's also a 10k shield whenever you guard with it from Chloris. And at worst, you don't even target Viol for the hostage effect. You can instead use one of your other units to target, and then you can use Viol as an interceptor still. So this entire package, I call it the Brig package. If you don't know what a Brig is, it's essentially a prison on a Navy warship. And decks like these in Standard has been called a hostage deck. The whole deck is called Brig Force, but this is mainly what it is this core package here. And the rest of the deck fleshes this out and makes the most use out of it as possible. The biggest thing is Aqua Force's playstyle historically has been tempo. They usually have really strong early games where they attack a ton for very little cost. And if the opponent doesn't hit a defensive, then it becomes a lot more threatening throughout the game. This has become a bit worse since decks scale a lot harder now. Decks have more tools early game in order to survive these types of aggressive turns. And now they have access to Honolly, which also makes normal Aqua Force a lot worse. So this deck takes that idea and flips it on its head. So now we are the deck that essentially just tries to live anything the opponent does. We never stop them from doing the thing. We just make it where them doing the thing didn't matter. So in order to make this package work, we need ways to tutor out Chloris or Viol in order to search the hostage order. And this is where probably the best stride in this deck comes in, which is Genbold. So Genbold is very, very good in here. Genbold as a card design was built based on the idea that this clan is usually fast and aggressive and not a control deck that wants to have certain pieces on the board defensively. So Genbold in the context of a control deck actually makes this deck function so smoothly, and it's honestly really broken. The way you win in this deck is to get to Genbold. You get to Genbold as quickly and as easily as possible. The moment you Genbold, then the game becomes so much easier to win after that. So the big things with Genbold, it can tutor Chloris, and it can tutor Viol, which can search out the set order. It also draws a bunch of cards, so you want to be able to find your heals as quickly as possible. So being able to draw 3, then drive check 3 is a very easy way on finding more heals. It also can remove the opponent's board, so if they're playing a deck that wants to keep the Rios in play and doesn't have easy ways to cheat out more units, Genbold just kills the board, and you usually get a decent number of attacks during this turn. So you also pressure their hand quite a bit as well. And in the process, you're drawing like a fourth of your deck during that turn. A lot of the time, you only need to activate one Genbold, but there are some scenarios where you need two in order to stall the game out more. Usually after your first Genbold, you're gonna be really close to deck out by that point. But without Genbold, this deck would not function nearly as well. Genbold literally makes this deck work. So to make Genbold work better, there are some annoying things about it. The first thing is you have to have an Excel marker if you want the draw 3, because you need 6 rested rear guards. So you have to produce at least 1 Excel marker. You also have to have a full board in that process, which can be really awkward when you're playing against any deck with any form of Denial Griffin play. So if you end up having the swing with a Rio first and they kill one of your Rios, you miss out on a draw off of it. So the best way we can fix that is by playing more cards that can rest your units in main phase, so then we can swing with Genbold first. And the main ways we do that is with Genbold's Call to Rested ability, but also is Pursuit Assault. Pursuit Assault fulfills so many roles in here. It should honestly be at 4, but the space is insanely tight on it. 3 has felt really perfect. So it has plus 5k power during both players' turns for each Excel marker you have. So it's defensively a beater, but the big thing is that you can Soul Blast 1, rest 2 rear guards, and draw a card. This combined with Genbold makes it so easy to consistently have Genbold go off every turn. So if we stride Genbold, we get 2 rested units. Pursuit Assault rests 2 more units, so we can either have 1 attack and then Vanguard swing, or if we have a second Pursuit Assault, we can rest the last 2 units and then have Genbold be able to instantly swing, which is really important. So against stuff like Naokami, Link Joker, Kagero, stuff like that, where they have instant removal during the opponent's turn, being able to rest your whole board and have Genbold swing first and still get all the benefits of it is one of the strongest things you can do in this deck, and preventing the opponent from fucking up your game state. Pursuit Assault's also just a good beater. If you have 2 Excels and you put it on an Excel marker, then it's 24k. It's not like the biggest number in the world, but just as like a 1-card beater in a deck that doesn't really get to play many beaters, Pursuit Assault's really good in that case. And then the other card that can protect that board for Genbold is Angel Ladder. Ladder is broken in here. So the big thing this deck doesn't like is mass removal in some type of way. So like Stun Verse is super annoying, Culture Gorilla is really annoying. Having like mass lock from Link Joker is also really annoying. But also just like stopping a single removal during your turn makes this card super worth it. It also later on protects your win cons if you didn't need it earlier on. If you have the double Pursuit Assault on your turn, then you can use Ladder later on to protect your potential win cons in this deck. Also, Ladder giving a soul is also insanely important because this deck can eat up a lot of soul, and making your Vanguard just slightly bigger is fine. It usually doesn't come up, but it can help out every once in a while. It also cycles itself, which makes it a bit easier to draw through your deck and find all the pieces you specifically need. So Ladder, you have to play. You have to play. There's no ifs, whats, or buts about it. So those are protection pieces during our turn. Ladder also combines as protection during the opponent's turn. There are some protection pieces we play in here during the opponent's turn as well. We have Dismal. Dismal essentially protects a rear guard from being targeted or hit whenever you use it. You mainly use it if you just need to protect your claws specifically. If you have like a bunch of heals that you're able to bind and call back, or if you already have a made bind zone. Dismal isn't the best one though. A lot of clans use Dismal in order to, as a protection thing, but Aquaforce specifically has a better Dismal, and that is Ioannis, the flip G-Guard. So when you G-Guard into Ioannis, you counterblast 1, you flip up a G-Guard, and then you choose any number of your rear guards, and they essentially get Dismaled. They can't be chosen, and they cannot be hit. And then for each unit you chose, Ioannis gains 5k shield. So this is really, really good in decks that could abuse a ton of mid-battle phase retire. If you're in a matchup where the opponent doesn't have retire, if you have access to a G-Guard, you have an easier time filling up your board, since then you can call important pieces you normally want in back row, Cloyses or hostage targets, and you can aggressively put them in the front row, so then Ioannis can protect all of them. Ioannis is another reason why this deck can function, and is an insanely powerful tool in a deck where you want to keep your rear guards in play. The one thing Ioannis doesn't stop, same thing with Dismal, are non-target removals. So removals that target circles, or just like targets columns, or just full board wipes. Ioannis does not stop any of those, but it does stop a lot of random shenanigans. And then with Ioannis, there's also a really good flip target, which is Galphelia, which is the other really good G-Guard in this deck, and why this deck can function so well. It gains 5k shield if it's the second or third battle of that turn, but the big primary one is that while it's face up in G-Zone, you can Soul Blast one, flip it back down, and either countercharge one or unlock one of your Rios. So because we want to consistently utilize our heals to G-Guard with, using 2 Ioannis normally would be all of our G-Guards, and we can't G-Guard more than that. Galphelia, however, allows you to essentially refund Ioannis and turn the Counterblast one into a Soul Blast one, and then combined with the resource heals, we also get to countercharge a Soul Charge one there. So Galphelia plus resource heals gives a ton of extra resource management this deck has so much access to. And then also flipping back down allows the deck to just G-Guard more often, which allows you to put more heals in your bind zone and allows Claws to guard more. Next up is kind of a necessary evil you have to play in this deck, which is 3 Honolly. The biggest issue this deck can run into are crest decks. This deck tends to take a long time to win, and the biggest thing we have to deal with are crest decks gaining a shit ton of power and scaling super hard the longer the game goes. This deck cannot win fast. The only way you win fast is if you sack the opponent really hard, but this deck can for sure lose fast as well. So Honolly is really a safety net against the decks that can scale super hard. So like crest decks, Nova Grappler, Gold Paladin, decks like that. Now, the really cool thing about Honolly in this deck is because you run all those protection pieces we just went over, you can call Honolly and just leave it there. This deck very rarely actually goes above 5 attacks. So Honolly can really gatekeep and really slow down a ton of different decks. And through a card like Genbold, we have ways to tutor them as well. So finding Honolly's in certain matchups is really nice, and then having cards like Ladder, Ioannis, Dismal to protect them is really cool. There's pretty frequently times where like on Genbold turn, you call 2 Honolly, you Ladder, and you just leave the Honolly's in play, and then the next turn you remove the Honolly's. Now, in very early iterations of this build, our main grade 3 ride target was actually Genovius. Genovius was cool because 1, it's an Excel maker, so if you go second, then you can instantly stride into Genbold and get your engine off running quicker. But if you go first, it has the skill to Soul Blast, check top 5, and call something, which can be really cool on trying to find either Cloyes, Veal, or a shield target. That's the really cool thing about this deck, is that really every single card is a decent call target, and you can make it full use and have multiple uses out of every single card in your deck because of Claws and the hostage package. And Genovius really went all in on that. Now, the only reason it's not our first grade 3 ride target anymore is that if you go first and you ride Genovius, you're doing nothing that turn. Genovius doesn't gain or give any power unless if you have specifically Pavroth and you're already at 4 more damage, which you're going first. You should almost never be at 4 more damage. So a lot of the time, you'll like swing for 10, swing for something on the Excel, swing with Genovius, restand the thing on the Excel. That's about it. So the grade 3 turn was too lackluster to make it the main ride target, but we still play it because it's an Excel maker, so we can ride it when going second, but also it is an active win con when combined with the Legion for it. So if you're unaware, Legion is a extremely old mechanic, and it got 2 sets of support, but more cards got Legion throughout G era as well. And Miltiades is one of those cards, and has historically been one of the best Legions in the game. So, performing Legion, both you and your opponent need to be at grade 3, then you can send any 4 cards, any 4, no restrictions on those, from your drop zone and shuffle them back into your deck. And then you choose specific name from your deck and put it as a Vanguard as well. So in Miltiades' case, it is Genovius. And whenever your Vanguard attacks, you combine the powers of the two. And any effects that say all of your Vanguards will give it to both of them. So a card like Angel Ladder gives 5k power to all of your Vanguards. So if you ladder while Legion, you essentially gain 10k power whenever you attack. So these cards are actively a win con in the deck, mainly because Genovius can restand the board late game, but also Miltiades puts cards back into our deck. So because games are naturally going to take a long time, if the opponent isn't careful, they will just lose to deck out. And Miltiades having access to Legion, because you go through your deck so quickly due to Genbold, the Excel markers, Pursuit Assault, things like that, being able to put cards back into your deck is really massive on making sure you don't lose to deck out. But also, you get to compress your deck super quickly into just triggers. We very rarely use Miltiades' on-ride effect to add a ripple from top 3 to hand, unless if our deck is so small that we need to find a second Miltiades in order to reride the next turn, and then Legion again. Now, the big thing to know is his second effect. So whenever it attacks all in Legion, if you have 3 or more rested front row units, you can stand one of your units and countercharge 1. And then if you have 3 or more rested back row units after that, you get to draw a card. The biggest thing to note is that Genovius needs you to have no standing front row in order to restand your board. So with Miltiades, you have to countercharge, and then for your restand target, you always target a back row. Because if you restand a front row, you can no longer use Genovius. So essentially, Miltiades just makes Genovius skill free. That's all this is doing. But Miltiades making Genovius attack free can be really big when playing under Honolly, or when playing with one of our future win cons as well. So this is the first subsection of our grade 3s. With Miltiades, we also have to play Fury Argus. Fury Argus is not a good card in this deck. Fury Argus is really good in a deck that plays a lot of beaters, because Fury Argus will restand them. He doesn't give power to all of them, just one unit. So he's only really good if you're playing a bunch of beaters or you are using Excel 1. You only play it if you have Miltiades and you have to ride Miltiades turn 3. This gives you a backup plan by being able to go Fury Argus to make that Excel, so you can guarantee go Genbold on the following turn. You will never ever go into the stride otherwise. Active primary win con in this deck, Repress Strike. Repress Strike is such a bonkers fucking card. So whenever the attacks are boosted, once per turn, on Vanguard or Rearguard, you can stand them. If it's 4th battle or more, he gets 10k power for the turn. If he's on Vanguard, then you discard a card. And then it's a ride fixer, so it has the normal ride fixer effect. So Repress, very, 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 very powerful. The best restander this clan has, bar none. It is also an active win condition in here. So a lot of the time, you use Miltiades as your win con, Miltiades plus Genovius, and you just compress your deck to just triggers. Call Repress Strike as an restander that you can restand off of it. So then, whenever you do swing with Vanguard, you restand your board, and then any triggers you check goes to Repress. And then Repress can make use of those triggers twice, and also will be base 19 by itself because of its skill to get 10k. Repress is a very, very powerful card. It's also very good early game because you don't really play a lot of grade 1s you like actively call early, but because we are playing the Brig package, we can actually call triggers down behind it. We can pretty consistently and actually just slam our triggers down and be totally fine with it, because we'll have an order to guard with them anyway, and once they're in bind, then if we already have Chorus in play or we find Chorus later on, we can utilize that shield again. This is the same thing you can do with Pursuit Assault, since its rest 2 draw skill is on Vanguard Rearguard. So you can also call down 2 triggers and rest them off Pursuit Assault to draw on your turn 2. And Repress also lets you just convert your hand to try to get 2 good drive checks. Sometimes you can sack really hard. Or a lot of the time, what you end up doing with it is trying to find a specific piece. A lot of the time, it's for a grade 3 ride target. It's for Chorus. It's for other shield options. Repress is actually really dynamic. Makes this deck way more consistent than it would seem. The Ride Fix effect isn't that important to use early on. You don't need to see claws as soon as possible, and it's honestly the preferred ride target. So yeah, with Repress and the Legion as wincons in mind, we're playing some interesting choices on a trigger lineup. This one's not so interesting, Bless Favor. So Bless Favor is an over trigger that's essentially a rainbow trigger as well. So it's a crit, front, draw, and heal, which is really impactful. It's the best one you can play on this deck because it can act as an active win condition. So if you are able to shuffle it back in off Miltiades and check it during your drive check and you have Repress in play, then you can have 2 100 million 2 crit swings on that Repress. It's also a heal trigger, so you can pretty aggressively check it early on in order to heal and pull cards out of your damage zone, which can be pretty important. A lot of the time it's for heals, so then you can bind them later on off your heals. It's for other triggers that you want to shuffle back into your deck. It's a front trigger, so it gives power to the whole board you just restood. And on Legion turn, because front triggers give 10k power to your whole front row, a front trigger essentially gives 20k power to your Vanguard. So you can catch people off guard if you're swinging for like 29k, which is a pretty frequent number for a Legion swing, and the opponent guards for 43, thinking it's 2 to pass. Then you check Bless Favor, and it's essentially a front trigger, and you give a bunch of power to your front row. And then also, really cool thing, you do not mind at all drawing this early. And if you do, really a lot of the time, you'll just slam it on the board, so then you can guard with it twice. So then you can guard 50k with it, then 55k. And then you have Legion, so you can shuffle it back into the deck later on in order to sack as well. OT, as cringe as it is a really cool aspect about this deck. Biggest thing, I talked about the front part of Bless Favor a lot, and it's really good. So we're playing 2 more fronts. So I have learned 20k shield, pretty good. And front triggers are no exception. Front triggers are so cool in here, because they can be a 20, then a 25k shield. And then also they become an active win con later on, and even checking them on like a Genbold turn can be pretty good as well. Checking them defensively can be pretty solid. A lot of the time off your Legion late game, you will be shuffling back in Genovia's front, and then whatever else. But 20k shield is actually such a good shield value. It is crazy how many attacks this comes up in, and is also like a primary call target of Genbold as well. If you don't need more pieces, you just need more shield value, then you can call a front off of it as well. Super cool, super sick. Playing fronts in here made me want to try fronts in more decks. Now, a couple good targets for Brig Force package. We have the Crit Sentinels, which are just 30k shields. We only play 1. Mainly we play it because we need more space in our main deck. So having this be a crit and a Sentinel is pretty cool, but also just being a 30k shield that can also be a 35k shield that you can use twice is also really good. Basically same thing as fronts, except it's just a crit. And then we also play 1D Perfect Guard. The biggest thing to note is with the Brig package, the order, the only Perfect Guards that work with the Hostage order are D Perfect Guards. They're the only ones that state when put on Guardian Circle. So I used to play 2, ended up being a bit too clunky and I needed more main deck space, so I sent it to 1 and put in a Crit Sentinel, and that has felt way better. But the coolest thing about this is you can essentially use this Perfect Guard twice due to the Brig package. One thing to note is that the discard on it is mandatory. So if you do move it and you want to use it as a 5k shield off of claws, you still have to discard. That will very rarely come up, but do note it is a mandatory discard. And now for another active win con is Alexandros. The biggest issue I've had with this deck is this deck does not have very strong win cons. Going from Novas to this has been a very big difference. So Alexandros can stand 2 rears and they get 5k power for each face-up card in your G zone. Because you're G-guarding so much, you actually accelerate this really quickly. So when combined with a card like Repress Strike, which can restand, Repress becomes a lot more threatening, and any crits you get, you just stack on there, and then you can swing with 50k 2 crit twice. That's like a big thing that this deck can do. Really, you can take out 1 Alexandros, you'll never go into it more than once, but there's not really much else you could play in this spot. So right now I have 2. It's the most flexible spot in the G zone though, if you want to try something else. The hardest thing to get down with this deck is figuring out when you want to Legion or when you should go Alexandros. because that's the next choice after your Genbold turn most of the time. Okay, we got through most of the idea of this deck. The rest of this deck is not so standard to how this deck plays. There's a ton of flexibility with what you can do with this deck. So biggest thing is figuring out our grade 3 ride target. We need something we want to actively ride when going first. And there's really comes down to two options. There's V Thavis and there's G Thavis. And in this deck, we primarily chose G Thavis. So we'll go over V Thavis first. V Thavis is better aggressively. The one downside with it is there's more of a deck building cost with it. One, you need to play Lambos or Magnolia Elder as a ride target, and then you need enough resters in order to consistently be able to use Thavis to superior ride. But the most awkward part is that you draw your cards at very weird times. You get a draw off riding V Thavis initially, then you'll possibly get a draw off Pursuit Assault, but mainly you will then superior ride Lambos, you'll swing with Triple Drive, and then end of turn ride back to Thavis and make another Excel to draw. This is fine, but the whole reason we did V Genovius before was to find a specific piece we want on the board, which is very important. And that is where G Thavis comes in. So the history collection tribe for G Thavis is why we play this, which is Tidal Bore Dragon. Tidal Bore is insanely cool in this deck. One, it makes 2 Excel markers, so it makes playing around Genbold a bit easier. It also G-flips. G-flipping is super impactful because Iolannis is GB1 in order to use. So if we get to flip this first and go first, we have access to Iolannis immediately, which is really impactful. It also accelerates our G-flip, so Alexandros scales faster. So those are some reasons, but the main reason is that you draw so many cards and you are able to call one of them during your battle phase after you draw all of it. So you get 2 off your Excels, you triple drive, which gives us 5, and then Tidal Bore's on-hit effect is that you draw 1, which puts us to seeing 6 new cards, and then we call 1. And calling 1 is the most important part about this. So this can be literally anything. Anything that says win plays from hand. It could be a Cloris that we're missing that we need. It could be any target to move up our hostage order, or it could just be another beater. But seeing all of those cards first and then having Tidal Bore be able to call one of them is so good. So impactful. And that's why we play Tidal Bore. We do not care about Ride Down. Ride Down actually hurts this deck more if we were to go for it off of V Lambos, because we want to be able to use our G Guards. We don't have room to play Rollock, so we use our G Guards and Cloris as our primary defensive engine. So riding down doesn't help this deck at all either. And then the other thing is the retire effect that Thavis gives is actually pretty impactful. It comes up a bit more than you would think, because a lot of the time if you end up going first, the opponent has like 1 or 2 Veers in play, and you can a lot of the time like swing at one of them with one of your first swings and then have Thavis be able to retire something. And you'll normally get to 4 attacks anyway on this turn. Thavis is like really actually not bad. We primarily play it for Tidal Bore, but having Thavis name 1 is really good to have our Soul and crits from Petros be able to go into Soul, which gives us access to more Soul. And then Tidal Bore as well is the really impactful part about this package. So that brings up some really good call targets. We have 2 Coil Assault. Coil Assault is pretty actively like your primary call target. That happens a lot. Essentially a 24k beta, 29k on an Excel, and then if you attacked 4 more times that turn, it can go to Soul and draw at end of turn. So Coil Assault is a nice like just surprise, hey, here's 29k you have to guard now when going first. It also helps cycle through your deck a bit quicker, and it's just generally a good beater. We don't play more because this card doesn't actively help the game plan. All it really does is it gives us a soul, goes through the deck quicker, and is a decent beater. And then another really good call target is Diantha. Diantha is so good in here. So Diantha is cool on being able to find whatever grade 2 you rode in order to call again. So if you like had to ride Coil Assault, then you can Soul Blast it out off of Pursuit Assault on the next turn. And then after Tidal Bore, you would call Diantha, and then Diantha can call the Coil Assault back. And then you swing for 37 on that column. It's able to reuse pieces that we had to guard with before. Any triggers we guarded with, a D perfect guard we guarded with, it can bring back Cloris. Any of those we can grab back off Diantha. and be able to use those again defensively. And then lastly, it's really nice to have late game whenever you want to have Repress Strike. You'll have a free column and you call Diantha and put Repress in front of it, so it swings 22 by itself, which isn't like a giant number, but will end up growing a lot more. And hitting that 2k magic number can be really good in a lot of different matchups. And then at worst, it's still an 18k beater on a Excel marker, which you do end up using sometimes. Then for our last grade 3, we have one V Thavis. We mainly play it because we want another way to make an Excel when going second, because we only play one Genovius. So having V Thavis as another target, that can sometimes also be a Vest Retire or something, which makes Gamble turns a bit easier, is really nice. Instead of needing 2 pursuits on a Gamble turn, you can have Pursuit Thavis, and then just leave your Vanguard booster standing. So then you can boost with it when you swing with Vanguard, and then that's still 6 rested Rios. We do not play either of the grade 4s because it's not very good in here. We basically only play it when going second, and it's also just sometimes a decent rear guard. And then just for consistency, we have 3 Baragios. Finding having a 8k unit is pretty important because I've had some builds where I didn't play any 8k grade 1s, and it came to bite me in the ass a lot. Also, it being a 10k shield, it does come up quite a bit because a lot of the time, if you have like 2 orders in play, you can guard with whatever your primary target was that you want to guard with, but you can also guard with the Spiragios for a 10k and then bring it back as a 15k. Which is pretty cool. And then it's also a 13k beater sometimes as well. Baragios also helps find ladder, which ladder is really important in this deck to have on certain turns. So yeah, Baragios just like ups the consistency, and I have not felt bad at all having it in here. Then we have Ripple Starter. Can come up with Miltiades if your opponent found a way to like put your starter back into deck. That should almost never happen, but still is pretty important. Also, I just like his art. He's cool. And then just like the rest of the generic stuff, just our like vegetables of the deck. We have 2 draw PG. We still want the draw trigger effect sometimes, and a lot of the time we want to use non-PGs as our hostage targets. So having draw PGs in here just as like additional perfect guards is pretty good. You have to be careful late game scenarios though, because you can deck out if you aren't paying attention to if both of your draws are out already. Then we have 3 Hiscol crit. We can only play 3 because we run the Crit Sentinel, which has the same name. This is also a really good call target early, because then you can ride Thavis on your turn 3 and be able to put in the soul to draw and refund itself. It's also a 15k shield with hostage package. It's a defensive draw, which this deck's hand early game is pretty fragile. So having really additional draw triggers helps maintain card economy. It's also pretty good on title board turns on being able to help clear your board a bit more, because then you'll call it on an Excel and it'll be a 9k swing. You have something on the other Excel like a Pursuit Assault that swings, and then you swing with title board, and then you can put Petros into Soul, and then you can call Coal Assault on that Excel circle now. Soul can be pretty expensive in this deck, so having just more ways to generate it is good. And then the last card of the main deck is 3 Shyfodder crit. Our grade 3s are pretty important. We really don't want to discard a Miltiades, that's the biggest thing. So just having more grade 3 fodder is pretty good. And whenever you do Legion late game, you'll pretty often put these back over Petros, because your deck will be so compressed that you don't want the draw off Petros, because then you'll end up in very scary deck out scenarios. And then rest of the G zone, Last Stride is Valio Survive and Harmonix. Harmonix you have to play. Yeah, Valio Survive is interesting. It's not very good in this build. It's like Fairy August, where you want more beaters in the deck, but you end up playing it just in the scenario where you are guaranteed to win as long as the opponent does not check OT or even a defensive heal. Then you go Valio Survive and power lock them to 11k. And 11k can be a pretty fucked up number as well, because then you can call like Cloris's or Honolly's on an Excel marker, and they'll be able to hit now as well. But yeah, it's basically just to guarantee a win when the only out's an OT. That's the only reason you go into Valios. Last 2 G guards, we have Ice Barrier Dragon, 25k shield if it's first battle or 4th battle or more. Comes up pretty frequently, actually. It's just completely free, does its thing. Just having a random 25k shield can be good. And then lastly is Dianera. I need to use this card more. I always forget about it, but you can Counterblast 1 if it's first battle, your Vanguard gains 5k power for the turn, and if it's 4th battle or more, it gets 20k shield instead. This card's cool. There are scenarios against decks like Tachikaze Gold Paladin, things like that, where you want the additional 5k, and having the additional 5k just like turns off all their attacks. But yeah, sometimes it's also just a 35k shield. And that is it for the deck. Next is a subsection of me going over all the other cards I entertained or tried and did not end up playing. This build is essentially like a standardized, just smooth build without as much thought about like counterplay. First, V Lambros, super aggressive. Would be better if you played the V Thavis as your primary ride target, but since we don't, it's just like a brick a lot of the time. Then Stride Lambros, I actually wanted to fit this in, but it was hard to make room with 2 spots in the G zone. We can take out an Alexandros, but the only other card you could like realistically take out is a second Genbold, which taking out the second Genbold would lower the floor of this deck quite a bit, because a lot of the time you might need the second Genbold in order to recoup even more if your first Genbold wasn't good enough or the opponent's turn was really strong. But this can also just be a different active wincon that can play. And now a card that I really want to make work, Skyros. Biggest thing is while on Vanguard, GB1, your front row Rios have resist. Now this is super cool. The biggest thing with this deck is it auto loses to Chaos Breaker, and it should 90% of the time lose to Narukami. It's also really good in the Chaos matchup on being able to protect your front row from getting locked during the opponent's turn, and just allows you to play a bit better of a game. A lot of the time though, your deck is just going to be playing a bunch of vanillas, is what's going to end up happening in the Chaos matchup. And your way to win is to deck them out, which will take too long compared to an actual tournament. So a lot of the time that matchup will either be you losing or double lossing. So either way you lose, unless if the opponent plays extremely fast. So Skyros helps there. Just in general, Skyros can be cool by being able to give you more options on where you can place your Chloris and all of that. And if your units have resist initially, then you can use Ioannis on all of your front row units and prevent them from getting hit as well, which is pretty cool. The main issue with Skyros, he doesn't produce an Excel, and he's really slow. You need to be at GB1 to get there. So he's okay if you go first, because then you can go Tidal Bore and then go Skyros on the next turn. But going second, it's a bit more rough. So I want to try to make him work. It probably has to completely revamp the build, but yeah, it's interesting. And then another card you could play with Skyros is Whipping Sailor. If you have 4 more rested rearguards in your front row and it's in front row, then all of your other front row rearguards cannot be hit. So Whipping Sailor is essentially Ioannis immediately without having the G-Guard into it. So in order to even get rid of one of your front row units, so if you have like a Honolly just chilling there, they have to hit Whipping Sailor and then they have to hit Honolly, which will waste 2 attacks. You can still always Ioannis a Dismal the Honolly. And with Skyros, it also gives them resist. So basically only untargetable removal is gonna be able to stop that. It's an interesting package, but it's a bit too much setup in order to get rolling. Then we have Stormwooler Thavis. Can be cool on Alexandros endgames if that's more of what you're going for. So then you can give resist to whatever your V-stander is going to be, like Repress Strike. And it itself can be a V-stander. You don't play wave units, so it'll never give the additional attack from back row off of it. But it's definitely a cool idea and is also like another restand target you can do off of Alexandros. Next, in Largolv, this is the card I'm trying a lot more next. I didn't really get a good chance to try it in this variation of the build, because we don't really want to add out grade 2s to hand. A lot of our really important cards are grade 0s and grade 1s. Like the only thing you'll maybe add within Largolv is like Ladder if you call it off Genbold, then in Largolv can add it. You could add Miltiadis to have guaranteed on the next turn. We don't play grade 3 heals, so you can't add a heal with it. Or you can call Pursuit Assault to make Genbold turns a bit easier. Those are like the primary things you can add back within Largolv. And one other card that would go really well within Largolv is the Watermelon Blitz Order. This essentially helps alleviate pressure from the Chloris package being as strong as it is. It just doesn't work in some matchups. So having the Watermelon Order just alleviates how much you need to see. It's also another grade 3 you can discard for a Tidal Bore effect or Stride Fodder. And then Largolv can let you add that specifically back to hand each turn as well. So that's like a variation I'm trying next, is making this combination of cards work better. But I haven't sat down and thought about what a build would fully look like just yet. Now for some grade 2s, we have the Chinese Cabbage. So you mainly play it to make Valios a better win con. Because if you have this, then you can use Valios Survive to power lock them at 11k, and then you call a bunch of cards from your hand. And with this, it gives them plus 5k power as well. Making those be able to hit, it's still like not a great win con, but it is something you can do. It's also a way you can call a plant token, and you'll have a bit of a better early game as well. If you ride Repress Strike and call this, then you can call the plant token behind Repress Strike, and then you have a free booster as well. You can also use this on Repress Strike turn if you have 2 CB, then you can give Repress plus 10k power, and then it'll be swinging 19 twice with a booster on the first swing. Pretty cool implications with this. A lot of these interactions are a lot more niche and aren't consistent enough to the build. Then Paparoth you only play because Genovius will end up giving 5k to everything you stood, so it gives you a bit of a better win con later on. It's just like sometimes awkward on trying to get it into soul, because a lot of the time you'll like basically soul blast one is what this ends up doing, and you only play one Genovius, so you're very rarely finding it off Paparoth. So yeah, if you were to play it, you play it at 1. But it is an option that I have tried, and it isn't horrible. It's just hard to fit into the deck. Then Magnum Assault, cool V-Stander. I was joking around, you can probably gaslight people in this thinking this isn't the Counterblast cost because it was misprinted. So if you want to try to cheat like that, you could play Magnum Assault, but it's just worse Repress Strike a lot of the time. Tidal Assault. This is probably the next best V-Stander you could play. It's another win con you can play with Alexandros. It makes Alexandros turns a bit better. It's also free, unlike Repress Strike, but you trade the freeness for minus 5k power instead. Tidal Assault's also a lot better on getting Tidal Bore active easier, because some awkward things you might have to do with Tidal Bore is put things you might not want in the front row because you don't play that many like actual attackers in the deck. But Tidal Assault will just end up being a 1 card get Tidal Bore on third battle. It's also better into matchups that can blow up your front row, so decks like Kagero, Link Joker, Narukami, stuff like that. Tidal Assault is better in those cases, since then you can not rely on having a booster for Repress Strike. So it's an okay card. It would be the next V-Stander you'd play if you try to play more in this deck. Then Dennis, I haven't got to a chance to try this yet, but Dennis is super cool. It's a rester, so you can rest it for Genbold. It also calls top cards, so a lot of the time, any card you call, you don't mind calling. You can call basically any trigger and then be able to guard with it. You can call any piece, and it's good. The only time you like don't like it is if you hit an order and then you just mill the order. That's like the only time you don't like it, but most of the time Dennis is like not bad. I'd play it at 1 if I were to try it, because Dennis also is a hard once per turn. Then Alania, there is a variation of the build where instead of playing Viol to search the order, you could play Kotia, and then Kotia allows you access to actually search for other orders you would want as well. So you can play like Soul and Body Condensation. You can play the order that gives 5k to something every time you attack. You can play that. You could play any grade 2 or higher order that you would want to add back off in Margolf. There's a bit more applications with that. So if we make more space in our grade 1 slots, we would cut Diantha, and then we would cut Viol to put Alania. And Alania's like a better early game piece as well, so you can be a bit more aggressive. Or if you like had to ride Chloris, then you can call Alania, Soul Blast out the Chloris, and call it back. So these are interesting picks. Definitely worth trying out. The main issue I had with Kotia compared to Viol was that Viol doesn't have to be placed from hand. So you can, if you haven't yet found the order, your Genbold can find Viol, which can then find the order. If you find Kotia instead, Kotia only works when placed from hand. Kotia is a bit less consistent on finding your specific order you're needing. Kotia, though, can still work when you call it off Tidal Bore. You can search for an order, but you can't play it that turn. It makes the deck a bit less consistent, but you get a bit more options when you play Kotia. Then the last grade 2 is a very, very cool one. Violence Brave Shooter. I did not know this card existed until I started looking through Aquaforce cards. So at end of battle, it attacked Vanguard. If it's the first battle, you can Counterblast 1, you can bot deck it. You look at top 3, you can call up to 1 unit onto an Excel circle, and then put the rest on bottom in any order. So Violence Brave Shooter was so close to making it into the final deck. If I had 51 card main deck, this would be the 51st. It does so many cool so many cool things in this deck. We'll go in order of like when you see it. So first thing is on title board turn. It's a 1-card turn title board live, which can be pretty cool. It's also just a multi-attacker. Sometimes the one awkward thing about the card is you have to put it on an Excel marker. So if you find like a trigger you want to guard with, or claws or Hanali, you would have to put it on an Excel marker, which you have ways to protect it through Dismal and Iolannis, but that does still put a little bit of awkwardness in there. But it's really good on finding cards like Pursuit Assault and Call Assault. Those cards are really nice to find. You could also call Petros on title board turn. So then you go 14 with it, call Petros, swing 9, then swing title board, put Petros to soul, draw, and then it's third battle for title board. The big thing though is late game scenarios. So it puts itself to bottom, and then you can choose to call up to 1 off top 3. You can choose not to call anything, and that'll put a new card into your deck, and you also just stacked the bottom 4 cards of your deck. There was one game where I played, and I legioned, and I had 4 cards in deck. So what I was able to do is I was able to swing with Violence Brave, put it to bottom, look at top 3. My top 3 was a Thavis Miltiades front trigger, and I knew that last card in my deck was a heal. So I was able to just choose not to call anything, and I stacked my deck to where it was Miltiades front Thavis, and then my Vanguard's Twin Drive ended up being heal Violence Brave Shooter, and then I guaranteed had a Miltiades top deck on the next turn in order to re-legion again. That's a very cool thing this deck can do. Violence Brave Shooter was so close to making the cut. This card is extremely cool. You should try it out. It's one of the coolest cards in this clan, for sure, and in this deck. Okay, now sticking the grade 1s, we have Narissa. Really cool early game piece. You can rest it off Pursuit Assault and then restand it, and it'll end up being an 18k. You also get rewarded more for calling your stuff down early, and then it also refuels your soul to dig deeper into your deck. It's really cool in here. I've tried it a lot. I ended up with Baragios instead, but Narissa was like second best card in that slot. The one like kind of awkward thing with it is you actually a lot of the time don't even want to put this in the soul. You just want to keep it on the board, so then you can guard with it with the Brig package. And because of that, Baragios end up being better in my opinion, but Narissa is still like a good choice and a good card in this deck. G Nikki, it's more consistent on finding Thavis. I might try it next because there's quite a few times where it's like, damn, I wish I had V Thavis here to ride and then go in the Genbold. It's also more stride fodder, which in turn can allow you to play different crits in your trigger lineup. So you can play Magnum Assault, I think it's called, or Magnum Brave Shooter. Whatever the Solan crit is called, you could play that instead of Bumper Shooter. Honestly, that sounds good. I might try that next. You just lose out on that 10k shield, which can be a bit more awkward on guarding early turns. Then we have V Nikki. V Nikki is pretty interesting. It can essentially give you more soul if you're struggling with soul, which for a long time this deck was, but I got to a point where it doesn't really struggle with soul anymore. It can also search for a Thavis whenever you ride it. It's just like kind of there. It's better if you play V Lambros or Magnolia Elder as your grade 4 ride target, and you're more of like a V Thavis variant of the deck. But it's also really cool in the Resource Heal Galphelia engine, because what you can end up doing with that engine is end up Soul Blasting 1, countercharging 2, and Nikki can make that Soul Charge free, essentially. So yeah, V Nikki is interesting. It doesn't help with potential deck out issues this deck can face, because the Soul Charge is mandatory. It does help in Genbold turns, because like V Thavis, it can be a 1 rester, so you rest it and rest 2 off Pursuit, call 2 off Genbold, that's 5 rested, and then you leave your booster standing, and then swing with Genbold first. That's another thing Nikki can do. Urgula is cool. Being able to move around your board is actually way better in this deck than you would expect, because sometimes your board state's in like an awkward position where like you need a booster for Repress Strike, but you have like a Chloris behind Vanguard, and then you have Urgula somewhere else. So Urgula being able to like move something over there is really cool. Urgula protecting that Repress Strike from defensive retire effects is really cool. There was something where if you put it behind Vanguard, you can like stop the opponent from doing certain things to your Vanguard. So like you can't get Shirayuki'd while Urgula's behind Vanguard. That's a really big one. The only like awkward thing with Urgula is that back row space is really important in this deck. So Urgula is already contesting with Chloris, Hanali, any triggers, the D Perfect Guard, stuff like that. Can also compete with Diantha. So Urgula's like, it'd be a one-up if you played it. It does have to compete with certain other cards. But I think once people know more about what this deck actually does, I think Urgula gets better. So yeah, there was NPix. NPix is bad in here because you want to keep a full board essentially. so NPIX will never be live. It also has to contest with back row space, which is really bad in this deck, so don't play NPIX. Even though NPIX is a crazy card, it is really bad in this deck. There's Connell. If you were to play a like anti-denial-esque play card, it would be Connell because it works during opponent's turn as well. And you can be more, it's a lot more loose on where you can put Connell. So it's really cool against like Mega Colony where you could stop Brilliant Blister. Because a lot of the time you will have to swing Vanguard and then your Vanguard's rested and then Brilliant Blister can like shut down Repress Strike. That's a thing that can happen. If you have Connell in front row, then you just shut off Brilliant Blister, which is really cool. It makes it harder for like Cannoneer to blow up your Claws or like other certain pieces. Connell is really good. It's a really good card. It also gives you a way to play around Steve as well. Because a lot of the time with Steve, they would like want to bind something, move up your claws, bind that. But if you have Connell in the back row, then they bind something, then they have to target Connell to move up. And then they bind Connell. So then they would need other forms of bind in order to remove your claws. So Connell helps out in that case. It was played a bit in here. The matchups I ended up playing didn't make Connell seem good, but it is good in like very specific matchups. Wheel Assault. Wheel Assault's cool because it gives you like an additional attack. So you can like be cheeky and like call Claws to the front row and then have like Pursuit Assault in the back row. Then you can boost with Wheel Assault with Claws, and then you can swap Claws with your Pursuit Assault and have an additional attack. That's a cool thing you can do. It's also a decent ride target by being able to draw and call something. The Aqua thing is it's a counterblast, so it kind of competes with Repress Strike in that regard. Yeah, it like, because of how your board states are, Wheel Assault is pretty awkward to frequently use. Mist Off. Mist Off can make this deck's turns a bit more lethal because sometimes your early game is too slow where the opponent just like generates a shit ton of cards. And it makes it actually actively really hard for you to break through that without having to like survive multiple of their turns. So Mist Off actually reduces their hand count down. You don't really have an easy way to cheat Mist Off out during an opponent's turn. There's no way Aqua Force can do that. So you have to call it on your turn and then protect it, which can be kind of awkward if you're doing like a Genbull turn. Then you can go up to like 11, 12, 13 cards in hand, and Mist Off will make you discard down. The one plus side though is that this deck has so many ways to defend itself without having to use the cards in its hand that you can kind of get away with that. So Mist Off is another card that I really want to try, because in theory it's good, but it's really, really tight in this deck. Then last grade one is Unseenable Dragon. It's essentially another Ioannis, except they can hit it. It's like an Ioannis slash Dianera together. It's also more G-Guards, so you can have more access to your Ioannis. So if you were to play like a Skylos build, you would play more of this. It's interesting. It's like one of those other, if I had 51 cards in my main deck, this could be a 51st card. You would play it at like 1, maybe 2 max. I think if you go 3, then your deck becomes too bricky. But yeah, it's an interesting card. Being able to actually like use this as well, or have a 16, 17k base Vanguard is pretty cool. That's what it's called, Direct Strike Brave Shooter. This, if you want to take out Bumper Shooter, you could play this. You could take out Petros for this if you want a bigger Vanguard. If you just want more crits, you can add in more of these. And lastly, grade 3 heals. I think if you were to play a grade 3 heal, you would play at 1, because you really need to see your grade 0 heals in order to bind for Claws to be active. Now, you would play these if you want to rely a lot less on Claws. But the more you rely less on Claws, the more this deck loses that like edge or that secret sauce it has, right? But it does come up in games where like the opponent aggroes you super hard. If they aggro you really hard, your early hand's pretty fragile, so you'll end up guarding a shit ton or taking a shit ton of damage. A lot of the time you'll just go to like 4 for no reason. Now you can definitely come back from that because your defense game is so insanely powerful, but it is still awkward in those cases, and having grade 3 heals be able to alleviate some of that pressure is really good as well. And that's it. I've been recording for 1 hour and 45 minutes. This has been the coolest deck I've made in a long time, I think. Maybe not the best, but this has been like the funnest I've had in Vanguard, cooking this deck and making it work in so long. It's a deck that gets better the more you play with it. So this is where I'm at after like 3 weeks of playing with the deck, and there's still so much I need to learn. There's still so many cool cards you can try, so many cool ideas, and every game with this deck is like really fun and close. because games last a long time naturally, unless if you just get blown out early. And every game I played at regionals with this deck, my opponents were really happy after the game because the game was just so much fun, right? So yeah, that is all. I hope you enjoyed this. I don't know how long this will end up being, hour 45-minute talk of me just rambling about this cool new deck. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys in the next one.